Okay, good. Hi, David.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
That's good to hear. And how is things in Mexico?
Very nice. We are cold.
Yeah.
Cold for us is around 8 to 16 degrees Celsius.
Okay, all right. So it's a little bit worse in Denmark, I can tell you, in Copenhagen. We're struggling with -2, more or less. So that's good that we don't grow coffee here.
Yeah, one of
So,
the things that we are right now seeing is around middle January, beginning of February, there are big heladas, which means the temperatures drop and the water in the coffee plantation can get into ice. It can frost, so that could be very damageful for the coffee.
okay. But more or less, is it dropping too much, or how does it still consistent?
Yeah, this is normal. We're used to it, but we also have to be very cautious of the weather. We have to be very observant, and in these observations, we have to try to predict when the freezing are gonna come, and that way we can do specific activities to manage the temperature drops.
Cool. So, David, we also have other viewers online, so you can say hi to our subscribers on Prolog membership. The reason why I'm calling you, David, is because we are having our MAZATEC coffee for this month's subscription. So, David, maybe we could do a small introduction of who you are and what is MAZATEC?
Okay, great. So I'm gonna try to make this a small introduction. Hi, everybody. I am David. I'm a biologist by career, and I consider myself as a conservation activist. I try to understand the ecosystems and to grasp the essence of all the individuals and all the living species within the ecosystem, and through that, try to manage different relationships between everybody, and that's including humans, including trees, including animals, fungi, bacteria, in order to make the ecosystem much more stronger, much more resilient, and have better coffee in the road. So one of my biggest motivations through coffee is to work with ecosystems and to work with people. And I basically have been working the past 10 years for it's almost a third of my life with indigenous people in my country, in Mexico. And Mexico is a very biodiverse country in peoples, in ethnic groups, and in animals and plants and ecosystem. So in these regards, the MAZATEC people, it's an ethnic group. MAZATEC is a language, and it is very tonal, I would say. There's different words that have a very slightly different ending, which we cannot perceive, but they take different words for that very slight ending. So it's depending on the tones. And the MAZATEC people are very famous for their for the biodiversity and the use of their fungi and their medicine. There are a lot of famous traditional, they called chamans, or like people that have knowledge to cure. And it's one of the three mountain chains in Mexico. So in a big sense, the geography in Mexico, it's like a boot, and in this boot, in the biggest chunk of land, there's two mountain chains we call sierras, running almost north to south or south to north, and we call them both Sierras Madres, mother mountain chains. And there's one crossing in the middle, which is the neovolcanic mountain chain, and this obviously by its name has a lot of volcanoes. One of the famous volcanoes is the Colima volcano, which also produces nice coffee, and the other famous volcanoes could be the Popo and the Ista, which surround Mexico City. So in these three, if we imagine these three mountain chains, where the middle one of the volcanoes and the Sierra Madre close to the Gulf of Mexico cross, around that area is where the Mazatec people in Oaxaca have settled for thousands of years, and the ones we are working on right now. So this is a very biodiverse ecosystem. It's very important. It's a cloud forest, and in cloud forest, specifically in this one, the vegetation from the north, from the Arctic, and vegetation from the tropic crash, and they come together to build a different ecosystem which has a lot of biodiversity. And you can imagine this ecosystem by thinking of ferns, like the ferns that look like trees, of thinking of big trees, almost like sequoias, but they're not sequoias, they're liquidambar, which come from the north, and trees that come from the tropical area, like marañón, and also a little bit of copal, mezquite. It's a very, very diverse ecosystem, and very famous also for its funding.
Cool. So, David, what is the coffee that we received in this subscription? What did you do, and how have you been working on with MAZATEC for now?
Well, since I chose this path as a conservation biologist to work with coffee, I've been developing coffee producers to specialty coffee. And specialty coffee gives us an opportunity to work much faster and much stronger towards the ecosystem and the social development, because there's good price paid, and because there's also a new way of doing things that motivates a lot of farmers. And when I met with Sebas and with Jonas, we instantly got a lot of ideas in common and a lot of goals and a lot of dreams that we wanted to develop. And one of the dreams that we wanted to develop is to have a consistent activity and a consistent relationship with a group of producers that could really be focused on doing the things better. So from the beginning, I thought that this group of producers were going to be perfect for Prolog, because both ideas of working towards a future and not seeing things on the short term, but maybe on the middle and on the long term, was an idea that both groups of people had in common. So in this group, what I've been working for Prolog now is to develop a small group within the big group of producers that have a little bit more understanding and a little bit more compromise with the coffee producing regarding specialty coffee. So all of the coffee producers are shade coffee. All of the coffee is shade grown, and what I am doing right now since last year, with the help of another organization, environmental organization in Veracruz, is to plant native trees from the ecosystem in order for these native trees to be the shadow or to be the shade that nurtures the coffee. So the coffee is also organic in the sense that it is free from pesticides and from inorganic fertilizers. And in what we are working right now with the producers is to have to increase the inertia of composting. And in this composting for the coffee, we also need to build terraces because the coffee plantations are very steep. So if you don't build the terraces to maintain all of the organic matter, most of it will just drain to the watershed, to the bottom of the watershed. So we are building the terraces because we have already been working for more than 3 years on this composting inertia. And I would say the fundamental or the most motivating part of all of this is to work in the relationship. There's a very strong relationship between Prolog members and between the producer members, or the producer people. And in this knowing together, they have developed this human relationship that has built trust, that has built a lot of traceability, and that has built a lot as well, a lot of commitment between the two groups regarding the work that has to be done with coffee. And one of the ideas with this coffee is to keep monitoring and keep improving the way they process the coffee. So right now, traditionally, they've been growing coffee for at least, the producers that we are talking about have been growing coffee for at least 3 generations. So at least they are the third generation, and most of the coffee producers are between 50 and 60 years old. That's the average age. So they traditionally have been harvesting the ripe fruits. This is something they do pretty well. And then they accumulate maybe 1 or 2 harvests. Like, in, let's put an example. Let's say, for example, that today all the family goes to harvest. So they harvest the fruits and they put it in a place, like in a specific place for the coffee. And then the next day we would also go harvest, and they would stack up all of the coffee. And then when they have this accumulation, they would process it. So when I first met this process, the good thing about it was that they already harvested very ripe berries, very ripe fruit. But the bad thing was that when they depulped it, some of the fruits had already been waiting 1 day, maybe 2 days, and the other fruit were just harvested. So obviously there was some damage in the depulping process, and in the fermentation process, which comes after the depulping. Also, the process would take different times, and it would not be consistent. So the first thing that I worked with them in this was to harvest and depulp immediately. And I found that a lot of the fruity notes, if we did it this way, would be lost. So between the producers and me, what we came up to was to harvest, like they did, very ripe, mature fruit, and then accumulate it, wash it just with water, rinse it with water, and let it stay for another day. And then the next day we would depulp that fruit. So we could say that it takes one first fermentation in fruit. I would just say that it is harvested and then it waits in fruit, and then the next day it gets depulped. This way, a lot of fruity, a lot of very like ripe fruits, red fruits. We call it also tepache, which is a beverage in Mexico. A lot of these notes,
I know it too well.
come into the coffee. And after that, it's a pretty high region. It's around, I would say the average would be 1,300 meters above sea level. Some farms are above 1,600, 700, and some are between 1,200, 1,300. So the weather at night, when the harvest, this is the period when the harvest is done, which is winter, and the weather at night is pretty. The temperature drops for us. in our perspective crops, and maybe we would have around 4-6 degrees Celsius in the night. So when the coffee gets depulped and the fermentation is in process, it takes between I would say 2 and 3 nights in average. So we're talking about around 50 producers, between 50 and 150 producers. So it varies a lot, but we would be confident saying that it takes longer than 24 hours and between 24 and 48 hours, the fermentation process, because the temperatures drop. So we harvest ripe cherries, ripe fruit. We let them rest after rinsing them to take all the dirt and make them clean, and we let them rest for 1 day. Then we depulp, and we let in the fermentation tanks the coffee for around 24 to 48 hours, maybe a little bit more. And after that, the coffee gets washed, which is just rinsed again with clean water. One of the things that this region has is a lot of water, a lot of rain, a lot of water. Water is delicious, is very charged with minerals, but it's also a problem because coffee producers, once they wash the coffee, they put it back in the river, thinking that this does not damage the river, which is wrong. So this is another thing we are working. But once the coffee is already fermented and it's washed, it's put to dry. And the traditional process in this region is to dry the coffee on clean concrete patios. And this is another activity that we want to implement starting from this harvest. We want to construct drying beds and drying stations in order for the coffee to be dried away from the floor and to be dried mostly with air circulating instead of sun and heat putting directly into the beans. So rounding it up like a little bit, it would be that the traditional process is to harvest, to accumulate enough coffee to depulp, then wash, and then dry on patios. And what we are doing as a project from Prolog is to harvest the coffee, to rinse it, and let it rest once it's cleaned. Once we let it rest for 1 day, we depulp, we ferment for 24 to 48 hours, then we wash, and then we dry in African drying beds.
That's the future.
That's the
future. Yeah, exactly. So for all our subscribers, they can definitely expect more of this beautiful coffee in the future. Yeah, for sure. But David, can you hear me? All
yes.
Good? I think one of the things we talked about last time is also like the climate change about the coffee. Is there anything that you are aware of, like in that area of with MAZATEC according to the climate changes?
Yes. So this region, the region where the coffee subscribers are gonna have this coffee from, is an indigenous community and an indigenous people that have always grown corn. So their main crop and I would say not only sustaining crop as in food, but also spiritual crop is corn. And in these regards, they have been very observant and very knowledgeable of the climate, of the weather, of the stations, because if you depend on what you harvest, you have to put a lot of effort into harvesting the complete milpa. And the milpa is a traditional way to grow corn. And one of the things that the producers tell me about the weather is that long ago, and this is basically what happens in all the world, that the weather patterns were very clear. And right now, there's some rains where it should be dry in the dry season, or maybe there's a longer dry period where it should be the rainy season. So the patterns are not clearly defined as they used to be. This is one of the changes. And what we are working, what I have been working with them for the past years is to try to reforest, or to try to grow as many native trees as possible in order to establish or to try to imitate the original ecosystem. And in this way, we have a much more resilient farms and a much less changes in the temperatures and in the humidity. So this is one change and one thing we are working on. And the other thing that they say changes a lot is that the cold season is getting colder. So this means that coffee could be endangered, because Arabica coffee, which is the 100% of the coffee that is grown in this region, is very susceptible to low temperatures. So you will find different information, but textbooks say that if you go below 8 degrees for more than 4 hours, maybe the plant will have a difficult situation. So what we are doing, there's different activities that we do in regards to this. We spray specific teas made with plants in order for the coffee trees to be able to resist the frosting process. But also the trees are very useful in this regards, because when there's an open space, the freeze, like the freezing air, I would say, the temperatures get lower into the ground. But if the space is closed with trees, the freezing airs will stop on the higher part and will not get all the way down to the coffee. So weather patterns are not precise as they used to be, and the freezing events have become more constant, and more aggressive. This is basically what people have told me that have
observed. David, I would say like to have the opportunity to say thank you for participating in our first coffee conversation on our subscription. Besides for being a coffee lover, I'm also a father of two twins. So I don't know if you can hear in the background, but I would say thank you for being here and being a big part of this journey, and also our online subscribers. Thank you.
Yeah, so just a quick hug to everybody in the cold weather, and to the coffee subscribers. Keep on coffeeing, because you have no idea how much motivation you give to us, to me, to the producers, and you can take for granted that you're drinking one of the best coffees in the world. And
that's amazing. Thank you so much, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebas.
See you.